Here on the Creative Thinker Podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way.
Wherever you're at on this lovely little globe of ours, thank you for joining the Creative Thinker Podcast. You have choices in your podcast, and quite frankly, you chose the best. Thanks for being here. First lines have always been a headache for writers ever since the form was invented. And, you get settled on, will it be the launching pad for the greatest book you've ever written, or is it going to be an epic flub that people are going to just not read your book for? Long story longer, it may not be that important, but it is important to the writer, and it is important to a lot of readers who are going to pick up a book, read that first line, and then decide whether they're continuing. And there's definitely some legendary first lines that we're going to dive into on this podcast. Hi, my name's Henry Moon, and I'm joined by
Michael Vasquez.
And we're talking to you about writing a good first line, what that looks like. Trying to get you set off on the right foot.
First line is super stressful. I know I've had a hard time actually getting to writing, and then that first line, once I start trying to write something down, I'm like, this has to be good. And I just get a little too stressed with it.
Blank pages are bullshit.
Yes, they are.
The first line is important, obviously, because it's the setup for your book. I mean, it's unavoidable that it's the setup for your book. But it's like, if you're trying to summarize 80,000 words into one sentence, forget about it. I disagree with the idea around the first line because they put so much pressure on it. And it's like, you can't summarize it in one line. It'd be much better to daisy chain it, but I digress.
What do you mean by daisy chaining it?
I mean, your first line leads into your second line, leads into your third line, leads into your fourth line. It's something that sets up the first scene of the book. And you want to do that well, 100%, because you want to get your readers hooked.
Right.
But does it have to be the first line that's freaking amazing?
Right.
Not necessarily. Even the book, I'm going to read The Hobbit first line as we kick off here, because, I mean, it's in the movies, and I'm sure everybody knows what it is already. But this is already the beginning of a book that is not just the first line. First line of The Hobbit. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. That's the first line. That's one sentence, right? Okay, that's...
Yeah.
Why do we know the name J.R.R. Tolkien? Well, the second line is not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. Okay, that's a baller second line.
That is.
And it sets up your entire imagery. It's like, yeah, it's a hobbit hole. What's a hobbit? Okay, maybe this is going to be good. Maybe it's going to suck. But anyway, he sets up his second... Did I just lose the microphone? Hello?
I can still hear you.
Oh, I'm not professional. Anyway, so he sets up the next paragraph as he describes what the Shire is and what it means to be a hobbit. He sets up his entire first scene with those two sentences.
Yeah.
And that's why we know the name J.R.R. motherfucking Tolkien.
There we go.
So what are some other tips for writing a first line, Michael? Number one. This breaks down into 8 points. I didn't even point that out.
No, you're fine. 8 points to hopefully writing a good first line. So the first tip that we're going to be talking about is don't necessarily write your first line in your first draft. Just start writing. The first line comes when you have a firm grasp on the entire story. So like I was saying, sometimes when I sit down and just want to start writing, I have a hard time writing out. This is very good advice. Just start writing. That first line, we can always go back to it and then start forming that first line. And we can either, kind of take a broad picture and try and create a line that encompasses the vibe that we're trying to get into it, or it can start off, something with the hobbit hole. So we have a couple options there, but definitely that first tip is, don't feel the pressure to have the perfect first line on your first draft. Most of your sentences, most of your outline in the first draft is going to be changed up anyways. So don't have that pressure to do that.
And they call it rough for a reason, right? Like if you were making a carving, your first pass is not going to look like the final product, and you shouldn't judge yourself based off of that first pass. All the great artists are judged off of their final product, not their first product.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And this is a good rule for all of life. If you're approaching something that feels like it's too big for you, it probably is on the whole. So it's like break it down into component parts and make it into something that you can do. Like you're trying to sum up, when you come down to an empty page, you're trying to sum up an 80,000 word story if you're writing the average first novel. And to do that when you haven't written the 80,000 words yet is and expect it to be what the final product is going to be is kind of insane. So, I mean, unless you have all kinds of experience, like maybe a Stephen King, as we all know the name. So yeah, don't beat yourself up over something that really you should not have the expectation that you can do in the first place. Nobody can do that. Yeah. Chill out. Be calm. Be nice to yourself.
Do you need to?
Number 2.
Don't treat it as a novelty.
Yeah, play on words there. Isn't that cute?
Oh, hey, I get it.
It's adorable. Novelty.
Treat.
Yeah.
Now I want some ice cream.
That's good stuff.
All fiction rules apply. What's the point of your first scene? How can you support the vibe of the first scene with this sentence? So I know this is something we started talking about as we were trying to kind of figure out what the flow of this episode was going to be. When we were talking about that first line, I was like, are we like trying to craft like an awesome, great first line, or are we trying to craft that first paragraph or that first couple of sentences to get the vibe of the book that you want? And of course, as we started looking at some of the first sentences and first lines, you do get random stuff like I can't remember exactly the quote from The Hobbit that you just read. Read it one more time for us.
First 2 lines, yeah, we're gonna reference this a couple times.
Just that first line.
The first line: in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
Like that is such a line, but the next line picks up and really gives you the imagery and the mystery that you expect. But a hole in the ground lives a hobbit. It sounds, if you didn't know what a hobbit is, you think of some type of rodent, almost like a rabbit or a mouse or a fox or something, like something small in a hole.
And another point to that is, like, we chose writing because we have a lot to say and a lot of context we want to provide about it, right? Mm-hmm. Why are you trying to pigeonhole yourself into one line to describe everything? Mm-hmm. One ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
That's a pretty baller one line, but still, because it's in the context of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And so, I don't even know what the first line of the Lord of the Rings book is, but I'm sure it's good.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll look it up so we don't offend anyone. But I'll give you time to.
But again, daisy chaining, right? We want that first line to lead into our second, third, to lead into the rest of the book until our readers are lovably ensconced in fiction and exposition. So when we put that pressure on that first line, it's like suddenly we've totally changed the form of writing. And that's why, again, it feels so daunting. It's like you're totally changing what it is you do, which doesn't make any sense. And I hate when academia pushes this on us like it's something super important. Well, give me a good first line. Okay, well, I need some time to world build instead of just doing this one stupid assignment for, one sentence. Anyway, that's a little bugaboo of mine. Did you find the first line of The Lord of the Rings?
I have two different lines here. I think one is from the movie, potentially, and one I think is actually from the book. So we'll go ahead and go with the first one. When I Googled Lord of the Rings first line, this is what popped up. It said, when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton.
Nice.
That's a pretty dope first line, not gonna lie.
Yeah, and it describes a whole lot. It's like that is completely just setting you in. It's introducing you to where you're at, what the characters are. Like, there's nothing crazy different about that first line. It's like, here is what I'm about to introduce you to.
Yeah.
There's your introduction. If you read this line, you know exactly what's happening for the next 30 to 50 pages. I mean, it's a pretty long introduction in that book. And there's a narrative reason for that, because they're showing you the relative safety of the world, the niceness, the pleasantness, before they sweep you off into the mire that is the next 3 books of Lord of the Rings. So,
and then what I found down here is that people also asked, what are the opening words for the Fellowship of the Ring? I'm not sure if this is like what plays in the first book. Yeah, in the movie. It says, in the land of Mordor,
that's the movie.
in the firs of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others, and into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. One by one, the free lands of Middle Earth fell to the power of the ring. So that was more than one sentence, but for the most part, that was one sentence.
And that's way better than the one from the actual book.
Yeah, that definitely but it gives a different vibe, right? So it gives a different, meaning
I can hear the song.
Yeah, right. to the overall meaning of the story that you're trying to tell. I feel like in the first line of the book, this seems to be a story about Bilbo. But of course it's coming after The Hobbit, so you should know who Bilbo is when you're reading it.
And it feels like you're landing into like an outdoor barbecue. Like,
yeah.
That's what it feels like. And then the next one is like, oh, well, shit's popping off.
Yeah,
Middle Earth right now.
This is the ominous stuff of Dark Lord Sauron.
Anyway, like I said, I can hear that song. It's just playing in my head over and over.
But that's the point of the first scene, right? So those sentences were obviously crafted over much thought and process to create the first scene, so you can understand the vibe that you're getting in right into the beginning of the book or the story.
And we can say that the book first line set up the first scene. The book or the movie first line set up the trilogy.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the point of 3 movies instead of this is the point of the first scene. So there's a little bit of a difference there. They knew what the final product would be across the whole series of books, which I guess J.R.R. Tolkien did by the time it was published too, because it was supposed to be 1 book, and they're like, "You're crazy. This is going to be 3."
Gotcha.
Anyway, so that's number 2. Don't treat it like a novelty. Number 3 is what can you hint at later in the scene, or if you're feeling really plucky, what can you hint at the end of the book, like the movie line. It hinted at the whole trilogy. So if you're feeling like I'm going to write this thing and it's going to be awesome, then you're alluding to the final battle. You're alluding to what happens at the end of the book. Just like a good essay, a book is the same way. So you write this great introduction and it relates specifically to your conclusion. You want to make sure that you do that. But there's also things that you can relate to later in the scene, like reading that Hobbit first line. It relates to what he's about to tell you about. He's going to describe the Shire and how hobbits live and what hobbits are. And so if you liked that first 2 sentences, well, you're going to love this next bit because he's going to go into tremendous detail. And wait till you see how he talks about trees.
Yeah.
So it gives you a good taste of what's coming. And that makes a good first line. Good taste. What's the payoff?
I like what you can hint at later in the scene. A lot of first lines that I was looking at really talk about like kind of this grandiose thing. Like there's been a changing of an era, or a changing of, the guard, or changing of like there's some type of change that has happened in the world where someone is going to have to be stepping up. I like the first line and I wrote down a couple of first lines that we can reference from some books that I own in my home that I read. So I've been talking about the Aragon series, the Inheritance series. The first line of that book was, "Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world." First line, first sentence.
That's like such a Race to Witch Mountain, like kind of Disney movie vibe, where it's like I don't know, you can picture the wind, you can picture there's a note flying or something,
Yeah, and I like that because it really it leaves the imagination up to the reader for what's happening there. It's not crafting this whole story. It's not crafting any type of imagery, but it really leaves the imagination to the reader, because we could both have very different experiences on like what's happening there. Because I know Aragon, like I feel like wind is moving through the spine of the mountains and the trees are rustling as I hear that first line of "wind howled through the night."
Yeah, he does a great job of creating world context. So there's all kinds of locations he talks about, all types of scenery and stuff, and it's like you're always in context of that map in the world.
Yeah.
He does a great job of grounding. I love his books. Christopher Paolini.
Yes. Very, very good books. I'm enjoying them very much. All right, so was that our third point?
So I was going to read the next 3 lines you have down here because the last one's really good. I'm going to get to that one here in a second, so I just wanted to have it read once.
Okay, sweet. Sounds good.
Okay, so these are all books that you have in your home.
So this one, this next one, it's a Star Wars book, and it's Republic Commandos, and so it's a very military type book. I enjoyed, and this author does a lot of military type books. Whenever she goes into Star Wars, it's very strategic. She wrote some Gears of War books, and she also has her own sci-fi stuff that she did. Kareen Travis was her name of the author. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and with that line.
Okay, you have to see the funny side of things. Yeah, I forgot to change the camera. Boy, it's just so much professionalism. You have to see the funny side of things in the Army. I think they have a real sense of humor in defense procurement too.
So this, again, talking about what we've already talked about, leading into the next scene, what's happening here is Republic Commandos, right? Star Wars, clone troopers, clone commandos, they traditionally start off in white armor. And this is the second book in the series. And in the second book, you get the vibe, because he explains it more, that they've been asking for black armor so that they can blend in, and then they get their black armor and get sent to a snow planet. So he's like, this is the sense of humor that they have. And then of course, it's war, so it's like you got to have a sense of humor because of the atrocities that you see.
Yeah, no, it's dope. I like that. And it gives you a lot of it's like an introduction to the character as well, because obviously he's a little bit sarcastic, obviously he's a little bit at the end of his rope too, but he's just putting up with it.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good first line. And then Black by Ted Decker. What's that book about?
So Black is a book, and I believe the series is called the Circle series, or it was the Circle trilogy, and then the 4th book came out later. But I think the book titles are Black, Red, White, and Green. So they're all colors, and it is a very interesting novel, or a series of novels. Ted Decker has, I want to say he has most of his worlds connected through some way. So it's very interesting reading his books and seeing how they connect. And so for this one in particular, this is the beginning of this dude ends up he gets hit in the head and goes into another time period almost. And in this first part of the book, he's actually getting hunted down for something the reader doesn't know, but then he hits his head, and he goes into a different time period where he gets to like heal up and learn different abilities. And he kind of goes back and forth between being awake, and he learns different things in each spot, but he can remember what he learned in both things. It's a very interesting book. It's I really like the book.
Good enough.
But this was the first line of the book, which I think, it's an interesting first line, in my opinion.
Nice. So here we go. Or are you reading it or me?
You can go ahead and read it.
Oh, nice. Carlos Maserian was his name, one of his many names. Which is cool because you're introducing like what we're going to talk about here in a second, which is the absence, right? Yeah, we got introduced to him, but do we really know anything about him?
Spoiler, it's not even the main character.
Yeah. Wow.
That's why I'm like, that's interesting, because I guess I remember who Carlos is, and I've been listening to that book as well, and it's not I mean,
not even a big character, huh? That's pretty gutsy.
Big character, but like not one of the main characters, I would say, not one of the main cast, I would say.
That's pretty gutsy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing his whole book and it's not even about,
yeah. So that's why I thought that was an interesting first line, but it was still like a really, really good book. And this first chapter, it follows him And that's what I thought was interesting. You follows Carlos this first chapter, but the rest of the book, he's more of like an antagonist character in the first book. But when you're talking about the whole 4, I don't believe he is. Don't at me. I don't remember it. I read them long ago.
I'd say that alone makes me want to read it more than any of the plot points or anything else. Like, he made the first chapter about a character that's not important in the story. I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting story beat. So this next one is from Star Wars again, Star Wars Legacy, the Force Bloodlines, right?
Yeah. So Legacy of the Force was the next series of Star Wars books that they wrote. Old Legends used to have like little series. So there was like the New Jedi Order series and some of the other ones I can't remember right off the top of the head, but like Republic Commandos would have been a series. So Legacy of the Force, this is what the prequels should have been.
Nice.
And so
we have 2 first lines here, one from the prologue and one from the chapter 1. And the one from chapter 1, which we'll read second, is the one that I'm queuing off on later in the podcast.
Yes.
So
I'll read the one from the prologue, and then you can read the one from chapter 1.
Sounds good.
All right. So this is what stuck out to me. Again, huge Star Wars fan, and why it'll make sense here in a second. And again, when we talked about first line and covers, I totally judged this book by its cover. I saw a newer Star Wars book with Boba Fett on the front. So I picked it up and I read this prologue and I was like, I'm getting this book. Whatever he's paying you, Fett, I'll double it, says the voice on the comm link. And at this point, I had thought Boba Fett was dead. So to me, I was like, oh, snap. Who is this Fett? Is it Boba Fett? Or is it someone else going by by the last name Fett? I don't remember off the top of my head. Haven't read that book in a long time, but
Nice.
Intrigued me for sure.
Yeah. Now you want to.
Yeah.
And that's a cool first line just because it's like, okay, you got somebody that's bartering for something. And so you're in the middle of the deal and you want to know more.
Yeah.
It's a good first line because it leaves you with an interesting question. And if you're already a Star Wars fan, well,
Yeah.
you're going to be there regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's the one from chapter 1. Let me pull it up. And it says, the worst thing about being 13 years old was that the one moment you were expected to be an adult and the next everyone treated you like a child again. Which I think is such a fun line for so many reasons. I think we can all relate to that moment in life.
Yeah.
It's
That line really stuck to me. I was like, oh man, I think I remember being a younger adult, and saying young adult, I'm probably talking like 14, 15, 16 years old, and looking at this book and be like, I totally relate to that. You're told to act like an adult and be like an adult, but then you're treated like a child. I was like, dude, I feel that 100%.
And looking back, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. But at the time, it's like, wow, this is so unjust.
Mm-hmm.
So now we got those first lines under our belt, a little bit more in the tank to percolate on. I just wanted to say one thing to clarify even a little bit further, which is that the introduction to the world is a teaser to that world. It tells the reader what they can expect. And that's not hyperbole. That's not it's literally you're telling the reader what they can expect. Like, again, that first line of the Fellowship of the Rings, that is the villain that you can expect for the rest of these 3 movies.
Yep.
So it's not like you're not getting any surprises. And you're not doing what Mr. Ted Decker did, which is like, here is almost like up close magic. Here's something to distract you, and then we'll jump into the actual story.
Yeah.
Which again, I think is baller. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure by means of like trying to reduce the pressure on people, because like you said, and I agree with, the first line is just a huge amount of pressure. So to relieve some of that pressure, just say, you're just showing them what to expect. You wrote this whole story and you're coming back hopefully in one of your 10 drafts later, and you're saying, okay, this is what the story is coming your way. And if all you did was describe accurately what the reader can expect, you've done your job. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Moving on. Enough said. So I closed my window. Darn. Okay. Number 4. How can you illustrate your main character or a story arc without making them into a caricature? Man, that's tough. So a lot of times when we take something and make it into this huge idea in our minds, once we finally get it on the page and we have to reduce it down to one sentence, brutal, but also impossible. And so we have all this context in our mind, and what tends to happen is that we assume that the context is in the sentence because it is in our brain. So we write down a few words and we think it sounds cool because it alludes to all of the thoughts in our head. But when somebody reads it without all that context, does it hold up? Does it not? It depends on case by case, right? But I was reading I read a first line for a teen book, and it was like, on this day, all of the, I think it was like all the junior high kids at such and such high school died, in their mind anyway. And I was like, okay, yeah, if I was a teenager, maybe that would cue me off. Like, I'm not the demographic now, but at the same time, it just doesn't hold the oomph that I feel like they wanted it to. So it left some to the imagination, or it didn't leave enough to the imagination. It was like, okay, well, a bunch of teenagers are having a cringe moment. Yeah. And and it's like, well, who cares? But wouldn't it be better to show the dread that is just pulling these kids down to the point that they can barely breathe? Wouldn't it be better to show that their emotions are so intense that they can barely function? And not only do they have to function around hundreds of other teenagers, they have to do it in the face of this event that everybody in their lives has told them is going to be the end of high school as they know it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody in their lives is making a panic. Wouldn't it be better to show that than to say they all died that day? And I'm not going to give you the author because I'm not trying to dump on anybody. It's just for example's sake that I'm bringing that up.
Yeah.
So to not make them a caricature, for me, it's always about subtlety and making sure that you're going through draft after draft and adding in things. It's like, okay, well, does this sentence allude to something? Does this sentence talk about the character arc that we're going to go on? Does it introduce the character's name? Does it tell me anything about this character? Like, if a hobbit's new to you, do we talk about what hobbits are or where they live or anything? What is it alluding to? How is it helping me set up my scene and my story? So yeah, you want to make sure that you can illustrate that early on.
I like how even like talking about both of the Hobbit ones, the Lord of the Rings quotes that we looked at, and some of the ones that I just picked up some books and took pictures of I took the first line of all of them and wrote them down that I just grabbed off my bookshelf. But what I like about all of those is it does start the introduction of your main character or a main character or some type of character. The one, I personally have the one where I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that one, is the one where it's like a character who is a main character but really isn't. But the rest of them very much lead into a character who is going to be present for most of the book. I really like the thought process behind those first lines or first couple of lines, bringing in that main character or one of the main characters.
And I think that the drawback to some of what we're talking about here is that it can lend you towards putting too much into that first sentence. Like you could argue at least the first line of The Hobbit, that was 2 sentences and it was pretty long. That second one was running on pretty hard.
Yeah.
And so it can lend you to trying to put everything into that first 2 sentences, which again is a very daunting task. It can be done, but it's also probably more than you need to do. So one thing that I've heard in the music production industry a lot is that the intention of the producer is to record the space in the room. And all that means is that in order for there to be music, there also needs to be absence. So there needs to be silence between the notes so that you hear each one clearly and you can feel yourself in between the notes. And I've heard the difference. It's hard to explain, but if you hear the difference, and like a lot of modern music production is sort of like, to us older folks, just noise. It almost sounds like static. There's not really anything discernible in the music if you turn on the radio other than the beat. And so that's because they're using a computer to produce music instead of a mixing board. Anyway, mixing boards gather sound a lot better than computer representations of mixing boards do.
Mm-hmm.
All of that to say, if you can record the absence in that first sentence, showing what isn't there, a lot of in the way that The Hobbit does, that you hear a hole in the ground and you think probably rodent, probably bugs, probably like a bunch of dirt and garbage.
Yeah.
But it's not that. So talking about what the absence is an important thing. Leaving space for the reader, like that Aragon first line, wind coming through the night, that brings with it a scent that's going to change the world, something along those lines. Anyway, that doesn't describe anything, as you adeptly noticed. And we're left going, oh, okay, well, I wonder what that's about. Like, I'm still curious, and I still have somewhat of a picture, but it's sort of like almost like fog going through a black backdrop. Like, I have nothing pictured.
Yeah.
It's just, but it's foreboding. And that is a great line showing what absence is. And allowing your reader to be there without seeing, to feel without knowing. And that's a beautiful thing. If you can accomplish that, really wonderful stuff. So that brings us to point number 5.
Then I probably jumped the gun on this one earlier, but daisy chain your first line. Let it be let your first line be a setup for the second, and so on. If it doesn't flow, it doesn't matter if it's a great line.
Again, the intention here is to take the pressure off of you, right? If you don't think you can write a great story, then I wouldn't spend a lot of time writing 80 to 100,000 words on it.
Yeah.
Me personally, I've done it a few times without publishing, and that doesn't feel great either. But if you don't think that you can come up with a good story, why would you spend time writing it? But if you think you can, and you did, and you're in the process of writing this first line, why put pressure on yourself when you can just write a great paragraph like you've done hundreds of times already, if not thousands?
Yeah.
So daisy chain them. Just link them together. Make them great.
Another, this kind of hits point 7 too, but actually, you know what? I'll hold on to
Hold on.
one more quote that we haven't said, one more first lines for point number 7. I'll read it there.
Okay.
But yeah, I really like, there's a lot of pressure you could put on that first line, but being able to really accept the fact that first line leads into the second line, which leads into either your prologue or your first chapter, which is what someone is going to be picking up off the shelf or, reading online that first part, and then they decide if they're going to continue to move on. If you remember that daisy chain and it's not just that first line, it'll be a lot less stressful.
Yeah, I think it brings up an idea that I think is really important in all of art, which is that flow is the most important thing that you can achieve in any art.
Yeah.
It's participating in that art and then sort of losing yourself in it. If you can achieve flow in your art, people are going to enjoy it. And it doesn't matter whether it makes a whole lot of sense either. I mean, I've read some poetry that flows so well. I guess pop music is a really good example of this, because some songs don't mean anything. They just, the words sound good together and they just sort of sing them together and it's awesome. And you're like, wait, let me look at the lyrics, because that didn't really make sense. And you look at them and you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
That was a lot bigger in the drug fueled rock and roll scene than anywhere else.
What?
But can't imagine where they strung those words together, but maybe it made sense at the time. But anyway, so flow is always going to capture your audience better than anything else you can do. So anyway, that's my rant here in the middle of the episode before we go on to number 6. Lies are an author's friend. This is kind of one of my favorites.
Yeah. That's a good quote.
Because it comes from the quote, all you need to be a memorable conversationalist is one great lie. I have no idea who said it, and anytime I look it up, it's like nothing comes up to say that it's even a quote, but it's a quote I've heard so many times in my life. So maybe it's just like a colloquialism. Anyway, so yeah, all you need to be memorable is one great lie. So any story you want to start, you just embellish. Embellishment is another another way to put it. But you can embellish your story just a little bit at the beginning. You get people hooked, and you make sure you round out that embellishment at the end. But yeah, you can punch up any kind of story. Like if you were at HEB about to check out and suddenly, there's somebody behind you that's like starts throwing things, right? Suddenly your story goes from, I bought some groceries before I got home to like, well, I saw a fight at HEB today.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing in writing is, you have these humdrum moments in your writing that's like, maybe I just need to move characters from A to B. This is one thing that killed me when I first started writing. I was like, the opposite of J.R.R. Tolkien, right? Like, I don't want to write about travel. Like, fuck that. I don't want anything to do with it. Yeah. My characters are where I need them to be, and that's it. I'm not going to write a single line about they walked from here to here. I'm never going to do that.
Yeah.
When I first started writing. And so I didn't. And I needed these little bridges to go from one scene to the next of, where if you're writing it for the first time, it's not like you're making up a lie, but it is you're embellishing a story of say The Hobbit, right? He goes on a journey. If it was literally just he walked from here to the Lonely Mountain, a very short book.
Yeah, right.
But then they ran into these cave trolls and they were going to cook them alive. Okay.
Yeah.
That's an embellishment that brings out your story. So if you feel like your first line is lacking, if you feel like it doesn't have the punch it needs, maybe you need to add another great lie to your first scene. Maybe you need to add that to your first sentence. Or it also alludes to the fact that maybe you need to say the opposite. Like that one scene that we sort of, or one first line that we sort of dogged on a little bit, saying, well, every junior died at this school.
Yeah.
Well, emotionally they did.
Yeah.
That's a great lie. Which, now that I think of it that way, I think of it as a better first line. But,
yeah.
So I'm not going to take back everything I said, but I'm going to say it's growing on me.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are a lot of things in that first line that I think it did well. Whether it's going to continue to tell a good story or not, I don't know. But I'm sure it resonates with a younger crowd to be like, oh, they died. This is the day that the seniors died. Or so they thought, or so they felt, or something like that, along those lines.
I did that last week.
So,
but all right, okay. So enough about that. Point A of number 6 lies your friend. Point B is that it can be useful to add the deception. The deception meaning that you can give your reader a different perception of what's about to happen, or your character themselves, who you're about to introduce, has a misconception of what's about to happen. So that's another way that you can add a lie to your first line that maybe pulls them in and has nothing to do with your story because somebody had a misconception about what's about to happen. So I wanted to make sure to throw that in. Number 7, Michael.
Introducing a character. Show the things around them, like their living spaces, like The Hobbit did. Or show what they think and hope it's relatable. Like in Bloodlines, when we were talking about chapter 1, again, that line, the worst thing about being 13 years old was that one moment you were expected to be an adult and the next everyone treated you like a child again. Very relatable. You're introducing the character you're about to introduce. I think it's like Ben Solo, I think. Old Ben Solo, not new Ben Solo. I think it's who was about to be introduced, or Ben Skywalker, I think, something like that. One Ben somebody. I haven't read it in a while. Don't at me.
Yeah, it's like you're creating someplace that the audience wants to be, or someone that they want to be around, or someone that makes them feel understood. It's the same way you create a relationship with a living human being. It's like show them that you care about them, show them a place that they want to stay. Like if somebody comes over to your house. This may just be a Southern thing, but
yeah,
you want to make sure that they feel welcome.
Yep.
Just kidding, Northerners. Anyway, you want to make sure that you clean your house. You want to make sure that you give them a place that is comfortable for them to be. You know, if you have a dog that likes to jump in your face, maybe they don't like that. You put them in the crate or you put them in the other room.
Yeah.
It's like you're just being polite to the person who came over and you're giving them a reason to stay. It's the same thing with your first line. You want to make sure that you give them something relatable or a character that, or a place that they want to be, rather.
So
you state that like 9 times. You're welcome.
So one of the quotes when I was looking at first lines, this quote stuck out to me. It was on this website, penguin.co.uk. The title is 18 of the best first lines in fiction. A lot of these lines, I don't recognize the books they're from. So sorry. But the very first one, it's 2 paragraphs, but I think it's 4 sentences, from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by another great author, C.S. Lewis. Here we go. The king is dead. Long live the queen. The announcer's voice crackled from the wireless in the winds around the rapt patrons of Berlin's milk bar as sinuously as the fog curls around the mournful street lamps, their wan glow barely illuminating the cobblestone. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids.
Nice.
End.
It reads sort of like a 1960s headline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Back when we still had papers. What are those?
Yeah. So, and even the first line into this article is actually really good. First sentences are doors to worlds. So I think like you said, like that first sentence kind of like takes you to a whole different premise in your imagination.
It's the big reveal. I mean, just like when you pick up a book, you open the cover, you get to read the first line. There's some excitement there. There's some joy. You're getting to see what this book is made of, and hopefully getting to go off on this pretty cool journey.
Yeah.
I saw My Name is Ishmael on the list, which is, or Call Me Ishmael.
Yeah, from Moby Dick.
Yeah,
I was like, that's a cool one, but I don't remember Moby Dick much either.
It's a weird book.
Yeah,
it's a weird book, and it's so long, and it's like I don't think the payoff is worth it. But Call Me Ishmael is a pretty baller first line. That is one of my favorites.
Cool.
Anyway, that's number 7, introducing a character. Before we do number 8, Michael, you want to do inspiration?
Yeah. So, for myself, one of the bigger pieces of inspiration that I've had is walking in the other week and seeing into your home, Henry, and seeing the painting that you did. Like, that was very inspiring for me. It was, inspiring for a couple different reasons. One, the actual painting itself looked awesome. And in my mind, it just created like a whole story of what this alien creature kind of thing was doing. And inspired me because you're like, yeah, I just did this, in 3 or 4 hours. And it's like, how much time, we've talked a lot about time management, especially when we're talking about like procrastinating or trying to be better. But, just a couple of hours on your craft, you can create something awesome. And I know a lot of times it's a struggle for us. I mean, shoot, even before we got in here and started recording, it was a struggle for us to be like, okay, are we going to do this today?
Dude, I'm so tired. Dude, yeah. Absolutely.
And so, we pushed through it. And, that's really the thing is just spend a little bit of time on your craft and you'll be able to make something. And it's might not always be great, but sometimes it's phenomenal. I really thought that art piece was really, really dope. It was,
You want to know something I don't think I told you?
What?
It's up in an art gallery right now.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah. That's cool. That's super cool. It was hella dope, man. I know you posted it on your
art page.
Yeah.
At Ink Moon Art.
Yeah, at Ink Moon, and I think on your story, on your personal stuff. But we should definitely get that picture on the actual Creative Thinker Instagram so people can see the image that we're talking about. It is awesome. And like I said, it inspired me because in one of our earlier podcasts, we talk about DM prep and stuff. And, I'm trying to make these great sessions for people, but I can't do it all at once. I have to spend time, especially as we're doing, kind of grander scale stuff. I'm having to spend like an hour here or an hour there. And it was just, refreshing to go like, okay, this could be my final product after, 2 or 3 hours of actually, working and prepping on something. So it was very inspirational to me. Thank you,
thanks.
Henry.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. It's up at the Bear Collective in San Antonio. Bear, if you're from the Texas area, you know how to spell that. It's Bexar. For some reason, I'm sure there's a linguistic purpose for that, but
Bear, aka Bexar, is what we
Yeah.
called it at Texas State. We're like, you live in Bexar?
yeah, so it's up in one of the walkways.
That's so cool.
So yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah.
That's my first piece of art that's up anywhere. So really excited for that. Thanks for sharing.
Dope. And what inspired you this week?
Oh man, it was a rough week. I'm tired. I don't know, man. Again, this is a time I get here and I'm scrambling for something because I didn't plan ahead.
Yeah.
I don't know. I gotta say, what's inspiring me right now is going to be Anthony Bassini. I think it's the last thing that really encouraged me because he was on the program not too long ago. And he's a guitarist in the Austin area, and he's with a few bands right now that are really taking off, and he's been on TV a few times.
Oh,
and,
that's what's up.
yeah, and on a tour.
Yeah.
And so, like, he is the quintessential grind mindset kind of guy. Like, he plays guitar 6, 7, 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Every day. I think he may take one day off a week now because he's trying to value his rest. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like, he's just out there killing it all the time, and I really admire that because that is not my journey at all. I feel like I set aside a couple hours or like even 15 minutes a day, and I feel like I don't make as much progress as I could if I did 6 to 8 hours. But I'm a little bit ADD, and I don't feel like that's possible for me.
Yeah. If you haven't listened to the interview that Henry was able to do with Anthony, definitely take a listen. It was really great. I was unfortunately, I can't remember if I was sick or something. I wasn't able to make that interview, but it was a real bummer, and it was a super awesome interview. He is a really, really dope person to be around. I've had minimal time around him, but the time that I have had around him, it's been awesome, and you always speak really great things about him. So yeah, definitely take a listen to that interview.
Yeah, check out his music. He's got his own. He's got his own music. CD out on Spotify. Anthony Bassini, Basini,
and we will try and link it in the show notes.
Yes, I should make a note of that.
I'll do that right now.
Oh heck yeah! All right,
as we start.
Point 8.
Yep.
Point 8. All right. So, point 8 to round out the show. Thanks again for listening. Is most of all, when you're reading that first line and deciding whether or not it's good enough, the only person that matters to or the answer matters from is you.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that first line feels good to you. This is going to get, best case scenario, this is going to get published or put out in the world with your name on it. It better be something you're proud of, so make sure it reflects your vision and that it reflects the piece that you put it into and that it shows what you want it to show, what you want it to show, not the publisher, not your friend, not your mom, whatever it is. The only person that it matters to at the end of the day is you. So make sure that it reflects you and it feels right to you. I think that, again, applies to all art.
Yeah.
Because, if you're out making art for people and making books and spending all this time, it's like, the only thing that makes your books different than anyone else's is because you are the one writing it. And so the more you lean into what you need and what you want and what you want to express, the better that end product is going to be. Find that flow, find yourself in it. I think that's what makes art beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. I don't have anything else to add to that. That is well said.
What do you think makes for beautiful art? I'm actually curious about that. It just popped into my head, but I am curious about it.
What makes for beautiful art? This is our question of the day at the end of the podcast.
I'm trying it out. It's a genuine curiosity. When I was writing this down for the episode, I was like, I spend a lot of time thinking about what I think it takes to make something beautiful. Like if I sit down in front of a piece of art, that painting that I spent, I think it ended up being 5 hours on, that if I sit in front of something, I need to be in a certain mindset. I need to make sure that I am allowing myself that flow state and allowing myself to just pursue, especially in painting, the colors that feel right to me, and the mood that feels right to me. And I need to make sure that it feels good in my heart. And so that's what I think it takes to make beautiful art. So like when you're sitting down to write or to prep, is there a mindset that you get into? Are you more of like the grind set perspective of like, if I do this enough, I'm going to be awesome? Like what's the...
I think there's a little bit of like the grind where I don't necessarily want to say the grind, because the grind has both very positive and very negative connotations to it. I think more so it's the hours practiced into the art or the craft, and then it's whenever you are lucky enough to get back into the flow state, enjoying that moment. And then I think that's where potential beauty happens, or when stuff comes all together. So for my DM prepping, my writing, it's when all the story points all come together and link up, and I finally made something that I randomly said makes sense in the story and in the world, and I've now created something different and created story points that will hopefully come back into our gameplay and hopefully hit beats that you guys don't remember or vaguely remember, and you're like, damn, we have actively not been thinking about this, and now it's coming back to bite us in the butt, so like that's kind of where my thought process goes. For me, I'm constantly thinking about our game and the other games that I'm involved in. So just thinking about that. And then as far as I've still very much view, and I don't talk about it as much on the podcast because some of the topics don't necessarily relate, but for martial arts and kickboxing, for me, it's really hitting the flow state, and it's really hitting those combinations. And whenever you're able to just bob and weave and read your opponent and read your sparring partners and not get hit, and beautifully hit a certain technique flawlessly. And to me, there is a lot of beauty in that, because you're also putting your mind and your body in a position, and you're using your body in a certain position, which is why people really love like things like yoga and things like martial arts and things like that are more active, like competition stuff, because they're having to utilize their body in a certain way, and which is a challenging way. And when I can get into a perfect flow state and, like I said, hit those techniques, bob, weave, dodge, and fire back, and still maintain my stance, it's that to me is a really beautiful moment, and it's probably one of the better flow state moments that I've had in the past.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody I've asked a version of that question to has told me a variation of the same thing, that there is a certain amount of faith in create, and I'm not talking about religion necessarily, there's a certain amount of belief in yourself, faith that you will arrive at a positive conclusion that is a part of making great art. And that's where I want to end on for this episode, because when you're writing a first line and you're making it yourself, you're making it your own, I mean to say, there is a certain amount of faith that you're going to land on the exact right line. And it's not because it is the perfect line. It's not because you've exhausted all the other options. It is because you have faith that you have chosen correctly. And that's so important in all art and in all of our daily lives, is just having that faith in ourselves that we'll arrive in the right location. So keep that in mind when you're out there working on your novels. I hope to read them. If there's any authors out there that have recently completed a work, or you've got an older one that you still like to share, send it to us. We like to read. We like art. Get it out here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening wherever you're at on this wonderful little globe of ours. Have another wonderful Monday. Take care.